Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world. Even more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, in Georgia, in Kansas, in Missouri, in Texas, in Arkansas, Chicago, Illinois, in California, in New York, Pennsylvania, in Canada, in Fiji Island, in Mexico, Spain, Africa, Kenya, Pakistan, Zambia, to the United Kingdom, to our brethren in Australia, and also to our brethren in Malaysia and in Indonesia, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, my dear brothers and sisters. This is our special episode number 19, just an hour exposition of prophetic study. As the last final warning message, just prior to the close of provision. Now, I would like to read again the statement on track number 8 on page 20 and page 21. The church must be purified. No Christian of any faith can honestly deny the church's need of purification. And as the Lord never does anything without forewarning His church, He is now sending to her the message of purification in order to give her a foretaste of future glory, so that as heaven's clarion, call to reformation, continue sounding forth among His people, they may have a keen relish for its truth, and may give themselves wholeheartedly to the work of reform. Right now, while He is clearly laying before them His plan for the setting up of His kingdom, with consequent results to the sinners. Those who give implicit heed to the call shall have an irresistible desire to come fully into line, and to have the Lord separate them from sin and sinners. They alone shall receive the seal of God, and as the first fruits of the kingdom, 144,000 strong stand with the Lamb on Mount Zion. Track number 8, page 20 and page 21. I would like to emphasize, my dear brothers and sisters, that the church from 1844. I would like to read this reading. In the old symbolic code. Two symbolic code. Number 10 on page 4. Two symbolic code. Number 10, page 4. It says, consequently, the church from 1844 to the close of provision is divided into two sections. The church before the loud cry and in the time of the loud cry. Or the church in the time of the loud cry. The latter of which will, by comparison, be far superior to the former in spirituality. In fact, there is no comparison between the two. Hence, those who cannot tell in which one of these stages the church now is, must be in great darkness. It seems that this statement is just written this year. I remember the statement on 2SR 256 saying, it is remarkable to note the perfect grammatical order of the words at the time of their application, clearly dividing the word of truth as though it were written just at the time the prophetic words are revealed. And that statement, brothers and sisters, can really apply to our reading into symbolic code number 10 on page 4. The statement that those who cannot tell in which one of the stages the church now is this present year must be in great darkness. There are two stages of the church before the loud cry and the church in the time of the loud cry. Now let us read tract number 8 on page. Let's read tract number 8, pages 47 and page 48. It says, why David a type? Why David a type? Inevitably, because he is the only one who perfectly fits the antitype, the leadership in the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message. So, there are two leadership. The leadership before the loud cry and the leadership in the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message. And that leadership represent David, or the house of David, or the 8th church in the New Testament succession. Then it says, this being so, then it necessarily follows that Saul, the first king who reigned over Israel and who was largely responsible for the early experience of David's life is a type of the church leadership in the period preceding the loud cry. The leadership which was raised up in 1844, and for the sole purpose of gathering the 144,000, the first fruits of the kingdom, in its case, type perfectly matches antitype. Track number 8, pages 47 and page 48. So here the shepherd's rod made it so plain that the leadership which was raised up in 1844 is represented by soul, or represented by antitypical soul. We know that that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There is no other church that had been raised by God in 1844. That church, the church before the loud cry, is represented by antitypical soul. But according to our reading, the church in the time of the loud cry is represented by David, according to the shepherd's rod. Now, brothers and sisters, the shepherd's rod made it so plain on the old symbolic code. Let us read here. On 9 symbolic code, 1 to 12, it says here, on page 3, so 9 symbolic code, 1 to 12, page 3, it says, so let's read the statement. But later, to the Laodicean leadership, represented by the angel, he makes an even more drastic decree and unconditional and equivocal, sharp and final statement that he will spew them out, thus bringing the Laodicean church government to an abrupt and cataclysmic climax. At this very time, then the church is to undergo a thorough house cleaning, a change of administration and organization. Even as anciently, the kingdom was rent from Saul and given to David. 1 Samuel 15, page 28. And this example from the history of Israel becomes even more impressive when one compares the circumstances surrounding the 7 churches with the selection of David, the 8th son of Jesse, who was completely left out of consideration until his 7 brothers had been tested one by one. 9 symbolic code, 1 to 12, page 3. Remember, the statement is very plain in track number 8, page 48. Type and antitype perfectly match. That when God rejected Saul God commanded his prophet, Samuel, to go to the house of Jesse. And God told the prophet that one of his children, God had chosen to be the king of Israel. And accordingly, historically, David being the youngest, it was left out of consideration at the time when Samuel went into the house of Jesse. Samuel thought that one of the 7 brothers will be the king of Israel. But from the eldest, when the selection began, the 7 brothers passed one by one. And after the 7 brothers passed one by one, that is the time when David began to be considered. Because Prophet Samuel thought that Jesse had only 7 children. And that is the reason why the prophet asked if there is still children of Jesse beside with the 7 brothers. That is the time that David had been introduced by Jesse. And that historical event, there must be type. And it cannot be applied to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because the Seventh-day Adventist Church is represented by Saul. And Saul is not a brother of David. And since the 8 brothers are one family, whether you believe it or not, that is the reality. The 7 brothers of David represent all the Davidians in the vineyard. Because at the time when David had been considered, at that time, David was not in the vineyard. He is taking care of the sheep in the wilderness. So the illustration is perfect. And that is the reason why this prophecy says, or the shepherd says, why David a type? In track number 8, page 47. Why David a type? Inevitably, because he is the only one who perfectly fits the antitype. He is the only one. The situation among the media cannot be illustrated by any other illustrations besides the family of David. And undoubtedly, the movement that was raised by God from 1930 to 1955, it must be the father of David, antitypical Jesse. And those movements among the media by which it were divided. Such occurrences is found in prophecy to represent the 7 antitypical brothers of David. And without any doubts, their period of time allotted by God to them were already ended. Already passed one by one. Now, the important portion that I would like to emphasize at this time is that the church before the loud cry could not be the church in the time of the loud cry. The church before the loud cry is represented by the church who proclaim the judgment that pertains to the dead. But the church in the time of the loud cry, it must be the church that proclaims the judgment that pertains to the living. Now, I would like to read to you, brothers and sisters, 1 TG. Here in 1 TG, let's read the statement. 1 TG number 22. So let's read the statement here on page 24. 1 TG number 22, page 24. It says, Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 3. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Now, let's focus, brothers and sisters, the statement, the Lord's anger. In the other prophecy, it is called the indignation of the Lord. Closely connected to the prophecy of Isaiah. In Isaiah 26, on verse 20, it says, Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpassed. Isaiah 26, verse 20. So that is the indignation of the Lord. Now here on the book of Jeremiah, let me see if I could find that statement. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 24. Jeremiah 30, verse 24, it says, The first anger of the Lord shall not return until he have done it, and until he have performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days, ye shall consider it. Jeremiah 30, verse 24. Here in Jeremiah 23, verse 20, it says, "The anger of the Lord shall not return until he have executed, until he have performed the thoughts of his heart. In the latter days, ye shall consider it perfectly." So they're saying, what is the first anger of the Lord? In the book of Jeremiah, in the book of Zephaniah, it is called, let's read Zephaniah 2, verse 1 and 2. 1 TG 22, page 23. 1 TG 22, page 23. Gather yourselves together. 1 TG 22, page 23. Gather yourselves together. Yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the first anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. And we know that it is pointing to the Jewish people who crucified the Lord. Right, brothers and sisters? They themselves declared in Matthew let's read in Matthew 27 verse 23 to verse 26. Matthew 27, it says here, "And the governor said," that is Pilate, "Why? What evil hath he done?" Pointing to Jesus Christ. "But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified." When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it." Then answered all the people and said, "His blood be on us and on our children." On the desire of ages, I remember the statement in Matthew, I think Matthew 24, saying, "But the end is not yet." So I would like to focus that state. Matthew 24. Matthew 24, verse 6. "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." And in the desire of ages, Small Prophecy says that the end mentioned there is the end of the Jewish nation. Desire of Ages, I think 628. Desire of Ages 628. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. That is Matthew 24, verse 6. Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, Desire of Ages 628, men wrestled for the supremacy. Emperors were murdered. Those supposed to be standing next the throne were slain. There were wars and rumors of wars. All these things must come to pass, said Christ, but the end of the Jewish nation as a nation is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Desire of Ages, page 628. So, the end mentioned there is the end of Jewish nation. And the beginning of their sorrows began in World War I. Because Matthew 24, according to track number 14, predicting World War I. It says here on track number 14 on page 12. It says, this is not to say that the former World War is excluded from prophecy, but simply that an entirely different scriptural background is given for it. The Savior himself predicted with terrible exactness the fearful conflict climaxing 19th centuries of wars and rumors of wars when he declared, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Matthew 24, verse 7 and 8. Indeed then, 1914, 1918, for the first time since the dawn of history, the nations and the kingdoms rose against each other. Famine stalked the war-ravaged countries. The death's head of pestilence followed after, and earthquakes in quick succession flung abroad their devastation to heap higher the woes of mankind. All these calamities but lead up to World War II, the most terrible one of all time. Truly indeed the sorrows of World War I did signalize only the beginning of sorrows. Track number 14 on page 12. And we know that World War II did not yet ended. And there is a final blow of that World War. And according to the Shepherd's Rod, the greatest of all wars will be in the land of promise. It says here in 2TG 41, page 18. 2TG 41, page 18. Just how this is to come about, I do not know. So, B.T. Hodder did not know when this prophecy would be fulfilled. But I do know that the greatest of all wars is to be fought about the Holy Land, or the bone of contention in this war is Jerusalem. the burdensome stone, as predicted in Zechariah chapter 12, right? That according to the voice of inspiration, at that time, Jerusalem will become the burden stone and the cup of trembling. It says here in 1 TG number 18, page 13, the outstanding events of its group are this. Number 1, Jerusalem is to be made a cup of trembling, and the nations of the earth are to be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. 1 TG number 18, page 13. So, we will focus our attention to that projected event, brothers and sisters, by which soon, very soon, it will finally be materialized. And it says here on 1 TG number 9, page 3, it says, Zechariah 12, verse 1 and 2, the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretches forth the heavens. 1 TG number 9, page 3. So, let's read again the statement. It says, Zechariah 12, verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. There are 2 points in this verse which we must seriously consider. Number 1, that the burden is the Lord's. So do not forget that the burden is the Lord's. It is not our burden. It is the Lord's burden. That the burden is the Lord's. And second, that His burden is for Israel, the church, not for the world. I would like to go directly to the prophecy that God's burden in Zechariah 12 verse 1 is to the 10 tribes, because Israel represent the 10 tribes. So we need to study closely, brothers and sisters, this prophecy. And then it says, verse 2, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Israel. Do not, against Jerusalem, against Judah and against Jerusalem. Now, brothers and sisters, do not forget Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14, the Bible is very plain. Let's read the Bible. Zechariah 14, verse 1 and verse 2. It says, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Who will gather the nations? God Himself. We know that at this present time, brothers and sisters, not all the Arab countries in the Middle East are united. They have different ideologies. But it was predicted beforehand. It is God who will put into their hearts that all of them will be united to attack Jerusalem. And we will be studying, brothers and sisters, the fulfillment of this prophecy. Although, not this time, I would like to go back again to 1 TG. Number 22. On page 24. This message is addressed to all the meek. Now, I would like to read again 1 TG 22, page 24. It says, Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have brought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. What is the Lord's anger? It is found in Zephaniah 2 verse 1. The first anger of the Lord against the Jewish nation by crucifying Jesus Christ. World War I is only the beginning of their sorrows. But according to Desire of Ages 628, but the end, Matthew 24 verse 6, the very words of Jesus Christ saying, but the end is not yet. World War I and World War II is not the end of the Jewish nation. That is only the beginning of their sorrows. So, the end of the Jewish nation, brothers and sisters, will be in the judgment that pertains to the living. And according to Zephaniah 2 verse 3, that when the very year will finally arrive, the end of the Jewish nation, that they will vacate the land to give room for God's people. We are counseled to seek meekness. I remember the statement on 2TG. Says that they will vacate the land to give room for God's people. It says Jews and Arabs will vacate the land to give room for God's people. 2TG 42 on page, I think, is it 26? 36. It says, now you plainly see that the unconverted Jews who are endeavoring to take the land of Palestine are not the people of whom these passages of Scripture speak. Now you see that Arab, Jew, or Gentile, all will eventually have to move away and give room to God's clean and purified people. Now, I would like to go back again to the reading in 1 TG 22, page 24. It says here, Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have brought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be, ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. And as I've said, in the book of Isaiah, that is called the indignation of the Lord. And according to 2 TG, number 5, it says here, 2 TG number 5, page 10 and page 11, Come, my people. 2 TG number 5, page 10 and page 11. Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself as it were for a little moment, until the indignation be overpassed. This plea shows that we are approaching the time of trouble, and that God is anxious to have us under cover. The wise will hear him and will accept the chambers, the protection he provides for them. And it says, For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth also shall disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain. All these truths which God is now bringing to our attention point to one thing, that the great and terrible day of the Lord is at hand, that he is soon to manifest his power and shake the earth so that everything that cannot be shaken may stand. Are you not glad, brother, sister, that God is giving you first opportunity to get ready for the day of God, to hold fast to his ever-increasing truth? I remember the statement on 2SR page 159. Remember, the shepherd's rod says that indignation of the Lord will be fulfilled while God's people are still approaching the time of trouble. Or in other words, this prophecy will be fulfilled during the Great Tribulation. The event to take place just before the commencement of the little time of trouble. It says here, brothers and sisters, and 2SR page 159, it says, those who are without God's protection will find no safety in any place or position. Testimonies for the Church, volume 8, page 50. So I would like to read again, volume 2SR 159. Those who are without God's protection will find no safety in any place or position. Testimonies for the Church, volume 8, page 50. And the only protection of God to his people is the seal of the living God. So, or in other words, the voice of inspiration is plainly telling that all who failed to obtain the seal of the living God, they will never be protected. Only those who receive the seal of the living God will be under the divine protection. Now, let's go back again to our reading in 1TG number 22, page 24. It says here, 1TG 22, page 24. When this judgment-bound nation begins to gather together, then it is, if never before, that the meek of the earth need to seek meekness. You know, the current event today, if you will look at, it seems that all Christian nations are now uniting together to protect Israel, to protect Jerusalem. And that is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Or in other words, in tract number 12, it says here, tract number 12 on page 53, current events that may fulfill prophecy. It says, because the boon of contention among the angry nations of today is the world's markets, and because the churches are threatened by the totalitarian governments, and thus urged to press together in order to preserve Christianity. I would like to focus to that statement that they will be urged to press together to preserve Christianity. Then, logically, the one that had been urged to press together must be the Christians, the Christian nations. Why? Because they want to preserve Christianity. Although, brothers and sisters, they want to preserve it in their own method, not God's method, not God's plan. And that is why in the prophecy of Isaiah, all their plans will come to naught. Jerusalem will be defeated. It says here in 2TG, number 2TG number 41. It says on page 19, now the statement, take counsel together, it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. Plainly says what I tried to tell you, that the nations, including the churches, have left Emmanuel, God with us, out of their plans, that what they are trying to do, they are doing on their own initiative and resources. For the words God is with us, coming from one who is not with the assemblies of the people, clearly implies that Emmanuel is not with them, and that therefore their work shall come to naught. First of all, the Jewish nation, they crucified Jesus Christ. How could God protect such a nation that crucified the Son of the living God? And they themselves declared, let His blood be on us, according to our reading in Matthew 27. Now, here, brothers and sisters, and 1TG 22, page 24. Let's go back again. 1TG 22, page 24. The meek of the earth are those who have wrought the Lord's judgments, who have proclaimed the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. They are His people, His church. Now, whose church mentioned here? Is it the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Does the Seventh-day Adventist Church proclaim the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord? Let's read the General Conference Special. Page 39. The judgment for the dead, furthermore, is not the message of the great and dreadful day. It does not even touch on the prophecies of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Does not even touch the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. What is the great and dreadful day of the Lord? The judgment for the living. It says here in 1TG number 28, page 15, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the judgment for the living. 1TG 28, page 15. Now, here in White House Recruiter, on page 21, White House Recruiter, page 21, it says, now that for the first time the parable is ablaze with light, none but the eye that is hopelessly gone out in dungeon, darkness can fail to see distinctly that the message with which we Seventh-day Adventists were entrusted in 1844 at the 9th hour is not the 11th hour message, not the message of the judgment of the living, but rather only of the judgment of the dead. Therefore, brothers and sisters, if we will study closely, here in 1TG 22, page 24, the church recognized by God as His in the judgment for the living are the people who are declaring the judgment that pertains to the living, the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And, of course, that is pointing to the shepherd's rod believers. Here in 1TG number 22, page 26, moreover, in these verses, two truths stand out clearly, that in vain the Jews seek to establish themselves in the promised land. Number 2, that we who are bearing the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, we the obedient, we the shepherd's rod believers, 1TG 22, page 26, that we who are bearing the message of the great and dreadful day of the Lord are counseled to seek meekness and righteousness, for thus only shall we be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. That is, merely bare knowledge of the message will not save us. There should be corresponding deeds with it. It is closely connected to Isaiah 61, verse 1 and 2. And we will continue tomorrow, brothers and sisters. Here in 1TG number 41, on page 24 and page 25. 1TG 41, page 24 and page 25. The reason given for the Spirit's power upon him is that the Lord God had anointed him to preach good tidings unto the meek, implying that if the Lord had not anointed him to preach, the Spirit of the Lord would not have been on him. Moreover, He was anointed to preach to the meek, to those who are not self-sufficient, not high-minded, but humble and teachable. The other class could not be taught. I hope, brethren, that all Shepherd's Rod believers are meek, humble, and teachable. Hoping not even one of us are high-minded and self-sufficient. Because the time is no longer far distant. So what I'm trying to emphasize, brethren, the church to be purified in reality is the church in the judgment that pertains to the living. And that is pertaining to all Shepherd's Rod believers. Before God could purify brothers and sisters, the church in the judgment that pertains to the dead, God will purify first the church that proclaimed the judgment that pertains to the living. And that is to all the obedience throughout the whole world. God will purify. And hoping that in this purification, hoping, praying, wishing, that if possible, not even one among Shepherd's Rod believers that will lose out. Hoping that all of us will follow the examples of ancient Nineveh. That all of them accepted the message and repented. Therefore God withhold His judgments. And all of them have been spared for such destruction. So brothers and sisters, to repeat again, the prophecy concerning the purification of the church is addressed to all who are proclaiming the great and dreadful day of the Lord, which is the judgment that pertains to the living, and such people cannot be applied to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I am not saying that the Seventh-day Adventist Church will not be purified. They will be purified. But the very first purification will take place among God's people who are proclaiming the great and dreadful day of the Lord. We will continue this subject tomorrow, and hoping that the good Lord will bless us and would help us. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. Have a beautiful, wonderful evening.